So today's an exciting day. We don't have to continue stripping the car. We can actually start working on it in a little bit more of a fun way. So I'm going to begin seam welding the entire chassis today. It's probably going to take a while, and we'll see as much as we can get done. But the reason why I actually want to seam weld this car, or stitch weld as some people call it, is because as a car is actually manufactured, they're just taking stamped pieces of steel and they're putting them together. And they have small holes in those stamped pieces of steel, and they're just putting little bits of weld in each of those areas. So you have these spot welds every couple of inches on each panel of the car. Well, all of this is perfectly fine for a street driven car, or even for most race cars that have a roll cage that ties into the chassis. But on a rally car, because it sees so much stress from such austere environments that it's in, that the chassis can actually flex and these panels can begin to separate. So that's why you want to actually seam weld a rally car or any race car. And to do this, you're just going to follow along those seams of those panels that are actually spot welded together, and you're going to put little 1/2 inch to 1 inch long welds, thereby joining all the panels much more thoroughly together and strengthening the chassis immensely. Now, when you do this, you do want to take note of how the car is actually positioned. So I have the car on its wheels right now, and it's not contorted in any weird way. When I jack up the car and I actually put jack stands underneath it and I lower it back down, I can hear how much the chassis is flexing. Now, this is a 20-year-old car. Newer cars, it's probably not going to be as much of an issue, but it's still going to flex in a little bit of a way. And all of this is important to remember when you're welding it together. Because if you weld it together when it's up on jack stands or on a rotisserie or something like that, it's going to take whatever shape that you're going to actually weld it in. So if it's bent weird or anything like that, like if I had the front end jacked up and the rear end was on the ground and I decided to seam weld the entire thing, it would take whatever shape that it was currently in. So if the doors were hard to close or anything like that, that's how it's going to be when I'm actually done. Same goes for when you actually weld in a roll cage. If you weld in the roll cage when it's on a rotisserie or anything weird and you have chassis flex, you're going to have that chassis flex once you tie in that roll cage to the actual chassis. In my opinion, having the car on the wheels is the best way to mitigate any sort of chassis flex, because it's actually held up in the suspension components that were designed to actually support the car. Now, I'm only going to be seam welding between the rear strut towers and the front strut towers. I want everything forward of the front strut towers and everything behind the rear strut towers to still be able to crumple in the event that it actually gets in a wreck. You don't want everything to be completely solid all the way through, and then your body's absorbing all of that shock and causing a lot more damage to you. You do want crumple zones and stuff like that as much as you can, while still actually having a strong chassis. Well, that's enough talking about it. I need to actually get started on this thing. Before I can, though, I need to run to the hardware store and pick up some wire and extension cord ends for my MIG welder. That way I can actually weld the whole car, because right now I can't reach any of it with where it plugs in. So let's go grab that. And all done. So make sure if you're doing something like this, gauge your wire appropriately. So like this is 8 gauge for 50 amps, so that's plenty. So just make sure you figure out how many amps are going to go through it, and then size your wire appropriately. So now we're good to start welding. I do have a new MIG welder that I have yet to use. It's a Miller 211. I had a Hobart, it was a 110 only though, so I sold it, bought a new one. And it's a 220, which is why I have this, just like my TIG. But I'm excited to try it out. I'm gonna lay some practice beads, see how it does before I actually start doing the car and burning through some metal on that. All right, let's set this thing up, see what Miller recommends. So we got 7525, 240 volts, 16 gauge, 030 wiring. So 5 on voltage, 45 on wire speed. Alright, so you can tell that these three were the bad welds with no gas coverage at all, how shitty they look. But the one bead that I did lay down looks pretty good. I just got to play with the settings a little bit more, get a little bit more penetration out of it, but it looks good. I'll probably throw down a few more beads and then move on to the car. So I was going to mark out every inch on the inch and then skip one, so do an inch of weld, skip it, do an inch of weld, skip it. It's not really worth it to me. I'm not that OCD about how good this is going to look, as long as the welds are strong and look good, as in like a good weld. So I threw that out because that was just taking way too long. So all I'm doing is I'm taking my gnarly wire wheel and I'm cleaning up where the weld's going to go. Definitely make sure you wear eye protection if you're going to do this. And I am wearing a mask while I weld because I didn't strip the underside of undercoating. So when I was welding like the floor pans and stuff, it was burning through. So definitely want to limit how much of that stuff you breathe in. So I'm going to at least wear my painter's mask that I've got. But anyway, get to the driver's side floor pan and finishing up welding into the rocker panel. So all of the floor pans on both sides are welded and done, so I'm going to move on to the rear and take care of the strut towers now. Alright, I'm calling it quits for the day. I got most of the rear done, as well as all of the inside, so it's pretty much good for today. Pick it up tomorrow with the rest of the back end and then the engine bay. And we're back. Alright, so I was looking up a little bit on better ways to get rid of the seam sealer with the wire wheel, and so today I'm changing up my strategies a little bit. Going to be using the blowtorch on top of it to try to get it out of like the little panel gaps that I have where the seam sealer kind of creeped into, because it's contaminating a lot of the welds and it's making it really difficult to actually join these welds with some good penetration and in like a good clean weld. So we're going to use the blowtorch method and try to scrape out as much as we can once it actually heats it up. So excuse the really awkward camera angle right now. This is the trunk, so it's kind of hard to film, but all we're going to do is heat up the seam sealer as much as we can in the cracks along this seam, and then try to scrape it out with a small screwdriver as much as we can. Now it's a good idea if you're going to do this to have like a fire extinguisher on hand, water, stuff like that, and have somebody, if you can, watch the other side in case you set all of your undercoating on fire on the other side and your car is about to explode. Kind of a big deal, so just be careful. You're not trying to burn it out, you're just trying to heat it up enough so you can move it easily with a screwdriver, so don't completely set it ablaze. Alright, that should be plenty out of there now. There is some that'll still remain, but it's impossible to get it all out, so just kind of like turn up the settings a little bit on the welder, not so that you're burning through the metal, but so it burns a little bit hotter and it'll just kind of melt that stuff. Alright, just finished the back. This is all I'm going to do in the cab. It doesn't look very good, but you know what, I'm fine with it. It joined the metal together. Yeah, it made the strut towers a little bit stronger. I'm still going to plate them, and I might do some more once I actually cage it. Okay, so that's all the seam welding that I'm going to do today, and for a while. It's not all the seam welding that I am going to do. I will do some in the engine bay, following the frame rails to the strut towers. Those will be a lot easier to get at since I'll actually be like able to weld in a normal position. The ones in the trunk were pretty difficult. I'm not the greatest welder as it is, and welding out of position, well, like kind of upside down in a trunk with all the seam sealer definitely makes for some good experience, but it was fun. Definitely the most important part is surface preparation, just like with welding in any sort of environment, and make sure you have the correct settings. But that's all I got for this one. I'm going to start working on some other stuff if I got time. Just make sure you guys subscribe if you want to see more. I'll start popping out more videos as this build progresses.